I'm Alicia Plevitz and I'm from the company werecircle, and I'm here with my colleague Owen, and we are actually here today with you to discuss a strategy for green procurement or circular procurement. So what we are going to do with you today is shortly introduce ourselves and what we are doing regarding circular economy. We will do a short recap of a first webinar that we did within this project last year, as we are going through a step-by-step approach that we actually made a couple of years ago. And we will use that step-by-step approach on a case, and we will do that workshop-wise. So we will ask some input from you guys through a Mentimeter or just through the chat. Also, whenever you have a question, just feel free to raise your hand, take the mic, or just ask your question in the chat, because my colleague Owen will also have a look at the chat, try to answer your questions, or in the end, we also have a Q&A where I can answer all those questions and we will compile them together. So, as I said in short, who are we? We are a pretty small company of 5 people who are really expert in circular economy, and we actually help other companies to implement circular strategies. So it starts from strategizing, but also about piloting and experimenting on using new materials or new machinery, and trying to anchor it within the company. And we also do that in partnership because we think that it's very important to talk with suppliers, with customers, with other stakeholders within the process in order to achieve a circular economy. Oh, and can you quickly say something about yourself?
Of course. So, good morning, everyone. My name is Owen Sharp. I'm from Ireland, and I'm working with werecircle alongside my colleague Alicia. I work as a general project engineer, and I have a background in renewable energy engineering from university in Ireland. And today, my role is just to assist Alicia with the webinar, and it's smooth running. So it's lovely to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you, Owen. And maybe shortly about me, I joined werecircle 3 years ago. Also as a project manager regarding circularity, but I really started focusing on training and skills, as it's also important to really make sure that people within a company also know what circularity is, how they can use certain tools in order to implement it. That's why I'm also here today within this webinar, and I have a background in technology as a business engineer. Some of the industries that we are active in, so maybe that's interesting to know if you have some specific question, is actually within the plastics, within textiles, as well as the building environments. This is a little bit of a recap what I already said. We do analysis regarding like, okay, what is your starting point? We strategize on what is needed to implement circularity. We really go into action and try to improve it. And what is central within it is working together within a company, but also with the other stakeholders and partners. What I would shortly ask from you guys is maybe to put in the chat shortly your name, your organization, and your function, which could also help us in the long run to see like, okay, where did the different questions come from? And was there a link maybe between the industry that you were active in? So as you guys are doing that, I will start with the recap of the first webinar that we did, so that all of you guys know what circular economy is in pretty short, but also most importantly, what the step-by-step approaches that we will be doing. I think a lot of you, as you're here in this webinar, know that it's very important to have a look at sustainability and circularity, as we are seeing that actually the man-made materials that we are using currently outweigh our entire Earth's biomass. So that means that actually all the materials that come from plants, from Earth, from animals are less than the materials that we are actually making within companies. And what we also see is that that is actually a driver for the amount of CO2 that we are currently making. So it's very important to just think about what are the materials that we are sourcing and using within our company, and what is the impact on it on, for example, the environment. That's why it's important to have a right purchasing strategy in place within your company and have a look at what we can do regarding sustainability and circularity. But it might also be important to look at a circular procurement strategy based on legislation. And we see a lot more legislation coming up, for example, within the plastics industry, where, yeah, you really have to comply on using a certain amount of recycled content within your plastic products. So then you have to look at recycled materials and recycling suppliers, actually. But yeah, it's also important to do, for example, if certain clients have circular demand from you, then you have to go up the value chain to see how can we implement and how can we make sure that we comply to what our customers are actually asking. For the people who don't know yet what a circular economy actually is, here you see a picture on the left what a classic linear economy is, where we actually source certain materials and we make different components and parts from it and we assemble it to one final product. And we add value throughout that whole production chain. The customer more exactly, he pays for a certain good, he gets that good and he uses it, and after the use phase it's actually, yeah, destroyed, it gets rid of, and it's seen as a waste, so all the value is lost. And on the right you actually see the linear economy, wherein first we do the same things. We try or we get and source primary materials, we make parts and components into a product, and it's used by the customer. But what we are trying to do is actually retain value as much as possible. So that's why there are different feedback loops within place to make sure that the value is not lost. So for example, above, you see above the user actually a feedback loop. So we try to reuse as much as possible, or maybe to share certain goods, but we can also try to reduce the amount of materials used. We try to repair it or refurbish it. Think about refurbished phones, for example, where we don't throw it away anymore, but we try to repair it and maybe use even new or better parts to make sure that the phone works as good as, or maybe even better than it did before. Remanufacturing within the automotive industry, for example, and in the end, we try to recycle materials as much as possible. Then, regarding circular procurement, as I mentioned earlier, it's really important and it has a really big impact on the amount of materials that we use and maybe even the impact that your company has. I know it's a pretty busy slide, but as the PowerPoint will be distributed to you, you can have a look at it and read a little bit more than just what I'm saying. So on the left, we actually have traditional purchasing, so more in the classic and linear economy. And there we see that we actually focus mostly when we are looking for certain suppliers on the quality of materials. We see that 85% of all the decisions are based on the quality of products. Then lifespan, 45% of companies actually find lifespan pretty important. Then we see in a third place that price. So price and quality is a little bit of a balance. The warranty period has also a pretty important base, but then if we look at sustainability and recyclability, it's also a little bit looked at, but as we saw in the previous slides, I will go back a little bit. Recycling is actually one of the last or less retainable recycling or our strategy methods that we can use. So then actually came in place sustainable procurement, and here we also look at social and environmental aspects. Think about, for example, social standards and human rights, where we look at equal pay, for example, or the circumstances within or for the employees where products are being made. And we also look at energy efficiency and water efficiency, and how many water are we consuming, or maybe is it also water that is coming from, for example, the air and rainwater that we are using in our production process. So that is already a little step in the right direction. But then even further is circular procurement. And there we really look at, yeah, extending the lifespan of products. So think about the design of the products. Are we really taking into account the quality of certain materials? And is it made in such a way that, for example, repair is made efficiently so that when something breaks within a product, we can repair it and we can use it for an even longer period. We are trying to minimize and avoid waste as much as possible within the process. We also focus on strategies. If we make a product, is it reusable? Is it repairable? Or in the end, can we recycle the product and can we recycle the materials that are within it? And in the end, we also think about the end of life of a product when we are buying it. So we think about, okay, are the materials being recyclable, or maybe my supplier has a take back logistics in place so that if I don't use it anymore and it's in the end of the life, our supplier actually takes back the material and he will try to repurpose or remanufacture the product so it can be sold again. Those are some of the strategies that we can actually use within circular procurement. So then the idea is like, what is everything that we can actually procure? Because we can buy raw materials for our production process if we are a production company. But for example, also service companies can buy materials. Think about secondary materials such as office supplies, office equipment, but also gadgets at events or something that can be bought by your company. As a last introduction, we can think about why it is important to have a sustainable and circular procurement strategy in place. For example, think about how you can really have your sustainable vision as a company and a sustainable strategy, but you need to make sure that it's being applied within all your departments, as well as the purchasing department within your company. There you can look at certain pluses that it can bring to your reputation, for example, or maybe, yeah, certain suppliers or customers ask for it. But then the second point, as I mentioned earlier, it can also be due to a compliance issue or idea. Think about the legislation that I mentioned of using recycled material, for example, but we also have the right to repair coming up. I know that one is in Europe, but maybe there is something alike within your company. What the right to repair is actually, it's a legislation that is coming into place where you need to make sure that your product is actually repairable. So you need to make sure that you can actually dismantle the product easily so that certain parts can be repaired and if needed, can be refurbished or repurposed actually. What it also does is make sure that you have a stronger supply chain because there is actually more transparency. If we are asking for certain specifications from our suppliers, we can build up more transparency and we can also build up more trust because we trust them to make sure that they comply with everything that we are asking from them. But also downstream, it can make sure that we have better relations with our customers because maybe they ask for certain sustainable principles. And as we can be transparent about where our materials come from and what we are focusing on as a company within our purchasing strategies, we can also tell that to them. We can differentiate ourselves from certain competitors based on the choices that we make on the materials that we are using and sourcing. And as a last, it can also be an engine for innovation because maybe based on the strategy that we will be using, as you will see further down the line, we can find maybe new products that we didn't thought about before or different materials that we had never seen before. And it can have a lesser impact on the environment, maybe. So, as a last backup from the last webinar that we actually did, I want to go through the step-by-step approach on how it works before we really hands-on go into the different decisions that we can make within this approach. So the first step is actually involving people. So you need to choose like who is my core team who will be working on my purchasing strategy and setting up certain specifications. And it's more than just talking alone with the purchasing department, but also the management who sets up the company broad strategy for your organization, but also maybe if you're a production company with the operators, really the people who are handling the different materials and the different machinery because they know maybe what's going wrong with certain materials as you're making certain choices. To give you an example, there is an example of like a fossil fuel plastic foil, for example, that you're using as a packaging material, but there is also a bio-based foil that you can use. And what you think of, okay, the one who is biodegradable, for example, it has a lesser impact on the environment, but you can see it's harder to handle that material within your production process, and there more waste is made because the machines are not going or using it as efficiently as a fossil fuel one, and that one is in the production. Maybe it does have a higher impact, but you're producing way less waste as the materials are better using that material or that fall within your machinery. So there needs to be a balance between the different choices that you make. As a second part, we also have the inventory. So what we do there is actually set up, okay, what is the thing that I need? And we do not try to think in goods or products, like what product do I need? No, what is actually the function or the prestation that I need? Think about, for example, needing a chair or actually needing seating comfort. Those are two different things. Or do I need something aesthetically pleasing, as it is, for example, in a shop? Or do I need something, yeah, just for the aesthetics or just for simplicity, maybe? What you also do in the inventory is maybe make a list of the different suppliers there are within the prestation that you need or the product in the end that you need. Then we will actually examine. So we will look at the different suppliers that there are, but also ask our suppliers, like, what are you looking at? What are the different principles and specifications of your products or materials? But also talk with, again, our core team, as well as maybe our operators and other employees within the company to ask their opinion about certain alternatives that there are within the market, for example. Then we go, into the description phase. There we actually write down the different specifications that we need for our good that we want to purchase, and we will send that out to the different suppliers so they can see actually if they can comply to those specifications. It might be, for example, regarding the amount of recycled material that you are demanding within a product that you're purchasing, but it could also be regarding transporting, so that maybe you want them to only use local source materials, for example, and not import as much if it's possible, of course. Then after we made some specifications, we can actually set up some evaluation criteria. So if I'm making a decision on choosing a certain supplier, where do I base that decision on? We will see what kind of evaluation criteria there are in a couple of minutes. And once we bought our goods, we need to make sure that we do supervision. Is the product or the service actually doing what was promised? Huh? Does it really comply to, for example, the amount of recycled material that we demanded for? Or is it working as promised? And we could also think about during the supervision period, what will we do in the end of the life of a certain product? Within these next steps, there are some tips given that you can use when you're actually using this process. As I said earlier, you can use it for really primary materials. If you're a production company, do you need certain plastics? Do you need certain textiles or certain energy sources? But also for those office supplies and secondary materials as a company. Again, within the involving step, you discuss with employees as well as your core team what your needs are. You identify the different stakeholders. If I buy something, who does it have an impact on? You start from your sustainability or circular strategy on an organizational level, and you can work with different experts or different tools to make sure that that strategy is implemented. This is the example of the inventory that I did, and I already talked to you about, for example, the chair, needing seating comfort instead of saying I need a chair. You should focus on the performance of a certain product and see like, are there certain innovations on the market that I didn't know about yet? And you say like, what is the product used for? As I said earlier, in the examine phase, we are looking on how or who are the different suppliers on the market. We see like what innovations are there within the market and what alternatives are on the market. And again, we go inside within our company and discuss the different innovations and the different options with our employees, with our core team, and can think about certain certifications. As we will see further down the line, for example, if we want to buy certain packaging material that is based, for example, on paper, there are different certificates that we can take to an account to make sure that certain sustainable criteria or circular criteria are being met. In the describe phase, we can draw up the different evaluation criteria. Are we looking at recycled content on the lifespan of our product that we are purchasing? Is it reusable or not? What is the total cost of ownership, or what is the life cycle cost? Then we don't look at how much does it cost to buy it, but how much also does it cost in the end of life to get rid of a certain product? So what is the recycling cost? What is the repair cost of a certain product? And that should help us within the decision of choosing a certain supplier. In the evaluation phase, we set up those different evaluation criteria and see which metrics that we can actually use to follow up on it. So that's where you see that there are measurable goals. Within the workshop part, we will actually go into one tool that can help you set up and follow up on these evaluation metrics. And as a last part, we do have the supervision. So once we bought it, we need to make sure that the product or the material is functioning accordingly. And we evaluate, and yeah, it's good to get into contact with your supplier if we see that something is not adding up or doing what was promised, to just go into conversation with your supplier and ask why it's not doing or why it's not complying to a certain criteria, so that also the supplier can try to adjust, so that in the next step or when you buy a certain product or material again, it's actually better or doing better than it did before. We should also look at the realized versus the circular potential, make the balance like, okay, how is this product or material actually performing, and how does it differ from what was promised or what the potential was? And we should try to anchor it if it's doing what was promised. Think about, okay, how can we anchor this and make sure that we buy this product consistently whenever it's needed, and yet set up that fixed relationship with our supplier. And then we have the end of life with your supplier. You can actually go into, okay, if it's in the end of life or I don't use the product anymore, what can we do with it? Can it be refurbished? Can it be manufactured or recycled? or maybe there is like a take back policy where that the supplier says, if you don't use the good anymore, I will buy it back, I will remanufacture it, and I will give it a second life, actually. So then I wanted to go into the case because we will going through each step and you will make some decisions within our step-by-step approach. As I mentioned earlier, we actually did a webinar last year, and there we asked, okay, which materials are you actually buying as a company? And there we saw that, yeah, most people said that they buy office supplies, and that's actually why we base our example, our workshop today on one certain office supply, which is paper. But paper can be used in many ways. It can be used as a printing paper, but it also can be used as a packaging material or as a cleaning supply. So it's pretty versatile. And before we go into the decision-making process, I actually wanted to show you how paper is being made, as there are a lot of, water and energy consumption is coming into it, but also some chemicals like bleaching within the process. And we need to know how the product is made before we can make certain decisions within it. So I will shortly show you this video before we start with the workshop itself. Okay, so that's actually how paper is made in this next slide, but we will skip this video. You can have a look at it on your own. It was more regarding, okay, the last video was about the production of paper based on primary materials, so really sourcing it from forestry, but you can also recycle paper. So then, for example, cardboard is just added into the pulping process, and yeah, it gets shredded and wet again, and then it's added just within the classic paper production process. So in order to make decisions within our workshop, within the next steps, we ask you to join actually our Mentimeter so that you can help us make decisions within our purchasing process for paper. And I will ask you guys to scan the QR link. And then I have a first question for you. So the first question is just if your organization buys paper. It can be within a broad context. Think about packaging material, printing material, or is it, for example, a cleaning supply?
Maybe Alicia, while everyone is voting, I might go through some of the introductions we got in the
Yeah,
chat. So we have Philip from Helvetas working as a program officer. We have Katerina from the Institute for Research in Environment as a project assistant. We have Pande from the IECE and Melissa from Helvetas again working as a program officer.
okay, thanks. I still see some people being active within the Mentimeter, which is fine. Just take your time on answering the question. But I think that, yeah, most companies actually are buying paper as it is such a versatile project. It doesn't matter if you're a service company, then maybe you need printing material. But if, for example, you are a manufacturer, some of your parts or products might be needed within to packaging. Think about cardboard packaging, where it's actually a paper product. So now that everybody's in the Menti, we really wanted to go into the workshop. And as I just described how this step-by-step approach works, it's still very theoretical and high level. That's why we want to go through this approach with you just for the paper buying process, actually. So we will start with involve, we go into the inventory and see how certain decisions are being made. And we also give you some tools that you can use, for example, within your evaluation part. How can we choose certain evaluation criteria, for example? So now again, I ask you to go to the Mentimeter and just tell me, why do you want to buy paper? Is it, for example, for packaging, or is it for cleaning supplies? Is it for printing certain materials? Is it for some other reasons? You can just write it down within the Mentimeter. Yes, I see printing and cleaning hands coming through. I will let you guys write it down. Still a couple of minutes. Yeah, printing and cleaning. Yeah, internal design and note taking. Okay. I don't think that currently there are a lot of manufacturers within this webinar. So I see a lot of the same answers, which is making it a little bit easier within the next step. So I think that we will be focusing then on the printing material, as I see for internal design and note taking. Yeah, I think the same kind of paper that can be used for printing, or we will just say for now, we will say that printing paper is the same as the one for note taking, just for future decisions. Then I have one more question within this inventory phase. Actually, if you're buying paper or printing materials, what were some of, or what are the risks that you think there are within this paper production process? Is it that there is a lot of waste produced? Is paper a pretty price volatile product? Is there a lot of CO2 due to transport? Think about, yeah, the sourcing material really needs to be important because within my region, there aren't, for example, a lot of forests that are being used for paper production. Is it the working conditions, so the social aspect of it, or can it lead to just bad printing quality? Okay, I see that currently everybody already answered that the waste production is the most important one. Indeed, maybe to go into depth to it, for example, if you are looking at using less material, head reduction, or maybe refuse, maybe don't not even using paper anymore. We can think about, for example, a more digital way. As I saw, like taking notes was there in the last question. Do we really need to take notes, for example, on paper, or are there like more digital ways, like for example on a computer, or for example, there are also some digital notepads that you can use and actually reuse within it. So then we might be producing less waste. But also, for example, if we are printing certain pages, it's important to think about for what are we going to use it? Is it just to show something one time? Is it really for being stored and documentation or contracting that needs to be signed or something? It's just something to keep in mind when we want to, yeah, make less waste. I also see that CO2 production as well as price volatility, excuse me, are being added. Um, yeah, so I think that a lot of you're actually thinking about importing, maybe sourcing material, which could be. Maybe in the chat, you guys can answer if you know where certain paper is being sourced from. Is a lot of the forestry coming from outside your region or not? So then we know that a lot of transport is actually being used, as well as the price volatility that might be an aspect. We see that nobody thinks that bad working conditions are actually a part of it, as well as the bad printing quality. Only one of you said that. So we will keep the three first ones in mind within our next decisions. So another question that I did not ask you to answer is actually who needs to be involved within this step. Eh? As I mentioned earlier, and the research that we did last year, we see that it's important to actually have like one core team there to help you make those decisions. It's not just the purchasing department, but also like, for example, the accountancy department or the accountants if it's one person within a small company, to also take into account, for example, yeah, the economical impact on your company, but also, yeah, just the employees within a company, right? As they are handling the material for printing. Yeah, it's an office supply, so it's not that it's being used in the production side, but if you're sourcing plastics, for example, because you are a packaging manufacturer, for example, it's also important to know how the material is being used and what are the problems that they are facing when really working with a certain material. And as a last part, you also see here downstairs that somebody answered that also suppliers and other stakeholders should be involved. It's just really to know, like, okay, what are other companies doing? What are other companies asking? What are my customers asking? And can I help them to actually fulfill their sustainable compliances and specifications? So then we are in the next step, which is actually the inventory. So what we are going to do here is actually think about, okay, what is the function that my paper needs to fulfill? You already answered that question, huh? You were going to use it for printing materials, to take notes for internal designing. So we do have the function of it on point, but we in the inventory we also need to think about, yeah, what are the different innovations in the market? As I already mentioned, it might be that there is, for example, a digital note-taking pad that you can use to write down notes and that you can reuse, or maybe you can just see like which suppliers are there within my region. That's why I actually have one more question within the inventory phase, within the Mentimeter, which is actually, do you know any paper suppliers within your region? And could you please name them? So that way you can actually also help each other to maybe get to know some new suppliers. You can open the Menti again, the Mentimeter. I'm not sure if all of you are a part of the purchasing department, so that might make it harder to name some of the suppliers. That is why I actually made, I see 123 ink coming. I do have some examples that I will show you in a minute.
Lisa, we just have a question there from Philip, just to put the QR code to join the Menti on the screen again so he can rejoin.
Yeah, okay. Wait, I will quickly go back to the presentation. Philip, and then I will add the QR code again. I have a lot of screens open. I will also maybe quickly
I
add
also
it.
put the link into the chat for the Menti
Yeah,
as well.
indeed. I was just doing that now.
Yeah. So if someone is loses the website again, you can join again.
Yes, indeed. Can you let me know if it works?
It does. I've put my response.
Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Okay.
Can you see the response?
Yeah, I'm going to that slide again. Yeah. I see your answer and I'm going to share it again. Do you see my screen again with the Mentimeter and the answers or not?
Yep. Yeah, see them all. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Yeah, so I see 2 answers coming in. Thank you. I will also show you some examples that we actually found. These were just some definitions of the function of paper that you can take into account. It's just to give you an idea, but you already mentioned printing, cleaning, for example, decorating or writing on it. Those are some of the functions that paper can actually fulfill. And if it's regarding making an inventory of suppliers, we have some examples here on our screen or within the presentations. For example, DS Smith is actually a European-based company, but it, for example, also has like production facilities within Bosnia or Albania, as well as I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, Al Grafika, which is also a production company in Albania. And then we have Natron Hayat, for example, who is active in Bosnia as well. So it really is just a matter of trying to do some web researches and trying to find some companies. This is just the first step. Then you know who the suppliers are, but you don't know yet what they stand for, or for example, if they can comply to certain restrictions that you are setting up, for example, regarding the amount of recycled content that you want within those papers, or maybe some more digital suppliers. As I mentioned, there is a new innovation of a notepad where you can take digital notes and write down digitally instead of writing down on paper. So then you're looking more at IT suppliers instead of, really paper production companies. Then we actually are in the examine phase. And what you see on the slide is actually a tool that we translated for you guys because it's from the Flemish government. So originally it was in Dutch, but it actually has like 5 core strategies that you as a company can focus on when you are buying products. So you can try to reduce the total amount of material that you are using. You can try to use less non-renewable or virgin inputs. You can try to expand or extend the lifetime of the products that you're using and that you are buying. Think about even within paper, for example, it could be, again, making the change from really just paper into a digital taking notepads. There you are using it way longer than you would just one classic paper. You can try to maximize the reusability of a product or a component, or you can use the recyclability of a certain material. What I'm asking from you now is actually to go back to the Menti, as you can see that, for example, within the reduction of the material quantity, we can say that we want to produce less waste, or for example, think about internal sharing of paper. For example, do we really need to print a certain paper if we want to have a discussion with a colleague within our company, or can we just like show it to them digitally on our computer? Then we would be using less paper within our company. The use of virgin inputs for paper production, it's not that important. Why? Because it actually stems from trees, and we see trees as a biomaterial, so it's actually renewable. That's why option B would not be, that's good to choose, because we couldn't do a lot of it or a lot of within it. We can try to achieve lifetime extension. For example, look at the design. If you're looking at packaging papers, does it have a modular design? Can we make it bigger? Can we make it smaller? We can look at warranties within products, or can we upgrade it? For example, an idea of that is within paper. If you, for example, give gadgets out at an event, it could be a flyer that you give out with information from your company, but you could also put on it, like for example, a guide on how they could fold that paper so that's actually folded into a bookmarker. So then that product is actually being repurposed, and they can use it for something else. And again, they see your company logo and some information of your company every time they open that book, as it's a bookmarker in the end. We can try to reuse certain materials, and again, we can look how the recyclability of that paper actually is. So now that you see these 5 strategies, we actually ask you to make a decision on which strategy that we would be focusing on. What would you focus on if you're buying a paper? Would you want to make sure that it's recyclable? Or do you want to make sure that you use less material when you're buying it? Or are you looking at, I would like to use it in a longer period of time? So please vote on it, because based on this decision, we will have different evaluation metrics. Yeah. Okay, I see somebody voting for reusing a certain product, reducing the total material quantity. I will just wait a couple more seconds before we switch back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, and just to do a deep dive. So we want to maximize the potential of reuse of a product or a component. As I said, with the paper, an example could be, for example, using the paper in different ways, within different functions. That could be a possibility. Reduce the total material quantity. So think about, maybe we can digitalize it, or really think about, yeah, should we be printing certain input or certain output, or is there another way to use it so that we don't need to use paper in the end? Or if it's about packaging, for example, if we want to reuse or reduce the total amount used, we can just reuse packaging that we got. If we do an order and we get a certain package within our company, why can we not reuse that box or that packaging material that it came in, and use that when we are sending out some packages, for example? Those are just some really small, quick wins that we can do as a company. And within lifetime extension, yeah, for paper, that's a little bit harder, as it's really a used good. So yeah, if we have written on it, often we cannot reuse it, or we can extend the lifetime of it based on the design of it. So I think that here we can really look at reduce the total amount of material, as well as reusing a certain product or components. If we're looking at the potential of reuse, I already mentioned, as well as recyclability. Within paper, recycling it is pretty easy. We can just put it again within the pulping process. And normally paper, as well as cardboard packaging, it's recyclable up to 12 times, actually, depending on how good the primary quality was, as well as if color was added to the paper. Think about white paper, that is more easily to recycle than, for example, yellow or red paper, as well as when ink is added onto it. So it's paper that has something printed or written on it. There actually needs to be a chemical process before, so that we can remove the ink before we put it back into our pulping process. So I will go back to the PowerPoint for now. As we saw that reduce the total amount of quantity was seen as pretty important, we can think about the internal sharing of certain documents. Is it necessary or is it not? so that in the end, maybe we produce less waste if it's just paper to use one time or to guide people, for example, with an arrow to a certain area. If you are giving a physical presentation, we can think about maybe we can just use like a reusable marker on a certain window instead of using paper, for example, where we print an arrow on. Then we would be producing less waste, for example. And with the potential of reuse, we can think about digital ways, or like, as I mentioned earlier, can we just change up how we use that paper, folding it into a bookmark instead of just a flyer, for example. What was also mentioned earlier by me within the examining phase and thinking about what is important for us as a company when we are buying paper, we can also examine certain certificates if it's about paper. Before I go into the different certificates there are, I also want to say something about the balance, because it's good to have certificates and it makes sure that there is some transparency on how a certain process is being set up, are certain sustainability measures and principles in place within that company. But it's also important to think about, getting certificates and going through that whole process. It's time consuming as well as it could be very costly. So for a small company, it's not always that easily to get certain certificates. So that's why it's also important to really have a deep dive on the values of a certain company, because it might not have certain certificates in place yet due to time and cost constraints, but their strategy and their actual processes could be really aligning with what you're asking for as a company and asking from your supplier actually. So it's just a side note that you can take into account when you are looking at certificates. Some of the very well known, for example, are the FSC and the PEFC certificates. They are really about how is how are certain materials extracted, whereas we have some, it's on a European level or even at a national level, some more specific certificates that really also focus on the chemicals that are being used within the process. Think about a video where we saw that bleaching is, for example, a part of the production of paper. What kind of chemicals are being used within that process? Or also take into account the energy that is being used, and are certain emission criteria being met? Are you producing less than a certain amount of emissions? And are you having a look at the waste that is being produced within your production process? For other products, there are also some different certificates that you can use. For example, the ISO norms or certificates that you can take into account within plastics, for example, but also within the building environment. It's just something that you can take into account within your purchasing strategy. So then we will actually move on to the last question that I have regarding the examining phase, and that is, because all of you said that you are actually buying paper, do you know that, or if you are buying certified paper or not? So that's where I'm asking to go back to the Mentimeter and just answer the yes or no question, or maybe you don't know, then you can answer maybe regarding the fact if you're buying certified paper. Yeah, I see most of you are actually saying maybe. It's not a question that I have put into the Mentimeter, but maybe it's interesting to put in the chat. Why are you answering maybe? Is it because you're not part of the purchasing department, or because up until now you have not thought about, oh, certificates, they could tell us something about the sustainability of a certain product? Just give that information in the chat, and maybe Owen can take the mic and tell something about the answers that you're giving. Yeah, so I see that, yeah, most of you don't know. Somebody said that they are really, not buying certified paper. And yeah, somebody said that they are buying certified paper. So again, just think about why you don't know. Is it due to your role in the company? Or again, is it because you just did not think of certifications being that important within your purchasing process? Just put it in the chat and then I will continue with the presentation. So now we are actually in the describe phase of the step-by-step approach. And that's just for you as a company really setting up your procurement specifications, because you will be sending out, for example, an offer and asking certain suppliers if they can meet your certain specifications. So for you as a company, is it important to see what kind of fibers are being used? For example, is it recycled fibers? Is it fibers from primary input or not? Are you looking at the chemicals? So for example, the bleaching process within the production of paper, what kind of chemicals are being used? Where are they coming from? What are the specifications of these bleaching materials? But you can also look at energy and water consumption and emissions that stem from them, as well as transport, because I did see that, remember within one of the first questions regarding the risks, some of you also mentioned that CO2 could be due to the transport of buying paper. Again, that could be important when you are writing down your contracts with your supplier. Are you looking at closing the loop? So, for example, does your supplier have something in place where he says, yeah, I can guide you through the right recycling facility, or for example, I can guide you through how you could separate the paper better so that's easier to recycle it, for example. And what kind of packaging does our material come to our company? And again, the labor and the human rights. But as we saw earlier, none of you actually voted for the social aspect of it, and you really believe and trust in the fact that the working conditions are good for those people. Maybe, Owen, did some information come into the chat?
Yeah, there was two answers there.
Yeah.
Both saying the same thing, that they're not part of the purchasing department and it's not related to their role.
Yeah, okay, I understand. So here you see a lot of text. Actually, it's just examples of written out specifications that you can use and really communicate with your possible suppliers when you are negotiating a certain contract with them. The first one is, for example, setting up certain criteria regarding the fibers that you're using. Is it from primary input, or should it be from recycled material? In the end, I will also give you a tool that will help you set up these descriptions and specifications, because it's actually examples of that website. So for different product categories and for each of these criteria, you can see examples of how you can write down your specifications. Also, how you can ask for evidence from your supplier, because if you're asking for a certain amount of recycled content, it's also up to your supplier to prove that he really can comply to that specification that you're asking for. And again, here you see actually the importance of certifications, for example, if it comes to using a certain amount of recycled material. If they, for example, have the eco label of the FSC label regarding paper, you know that there is a certain amount of recycled material being used within their paper products. We also have regarding the emissions that you can put up a certain limit and ask your supplier, yeah, we would only be buying paper if your whole production process produces less than a certain amount of CO2, for example. There he can show you, for example, some CO2 calculations for the production process. Yeah, I know that I'm going through it pretty quickly, but you guys will get a link so that you can read up upon it because it's also based on the choices that you make. Here we have, for example, the chlorine, which is a chemical used in the bleaching process. Where you can set up certain specifications and ask for, yeah, certain omissions of certain chemicals, for example, within the process that you don't want to work with. Then we have a specification regarding the transport and the CO2 that is being used. Think about, okay, how is it being transported? Is it by land or by air, for example? Is it through waterways, or is it by train or by heavy vehicles, for example? There we can really make up, yeah, certain specifications or certain impact measures on how much CO2 could be produced based on the transport. And then you can also not just set up hard targets and specifications, but you can also ask for certain commitments. Just to set up a goal and a long-term relationship with the supplier, you can say like, okay, in the long run, can we set up a certain commitment to work towards? For example, for now or currently, that supplier only can provide 50% recycled paper, but you guys can work together and work towards, for example, a product that's based on 70% recycled material. Whereas he can make that promise, you say that, okay, then we really want to buy products from you. We know what you're working towards, and maybe like he sets up like, or you set up together a target like within 3 years, we would like to have that recycled material from 50% up to 70%. That way you set up good relationships with your suppliers, and they also know that you want to work together in the long run. Then we are actually in the evaluation stage, and this is also based on the decision that we made earlier. Owen, could you shortly tell us again which 3 or 2 strategies that came up within that first decision? Were we
Sorry, no.
focusing
Yeah.
on, I think, reducing the amount of material, right?
Is it from the inventory or the examine phase?
Normally it's, or I could go back to the Menti. It's from the examine phase.
Okay, so I have the maximized potential for reuse in the product or component.
Yeah.
Reduce the total material quantity.
Yeah.
And the lifetime extension of the product.
Okay.
They were the 3 main.
Okay, thank you. Then I will zoom in on those 3 because I see that we are taking already a little bit of time up. So as you see on the slide, if you're looking at reducing the total amount of materials, how can we actually evaluate if our supplier is complying onto that, and how can we actually measure it, and what kind of metrics can we use? So here you see some examples of metrics, like for example, the amount of material used, or the percentage of reused material, or the percentage of refurbished material, as well as production waste. Then you said lifetime extension. There we can see just about the functional lifetime. So what does that mean? Like within a certain function, like for example, if we are using paper for sorry, I'm not finding the word currently, for like more of marketing, for more marketing areas, like for example a folder, for example, which is really printed with a logo, with some company information. Then the function is really to inform other people, or to inform possible clients from your company, and then we can say like, okay, maybe it can have a different function at the end of this lifetime. As the example that I mentioned earlier, we can make a bookmarker from it, for example. Then we can actually give it a longer life and different life throughout the whole use phase. And the third one was about reducing the amount of waste that we already have and reusing it. Yeah, for paper, that one is a little bit harder. Why? Because yeah, it's really a use good. So then we could be looking at digital innovations. As I said earlier, maybe we can have like a note-taking pad where we can use it, yeah, more often, and we can delete things and just like charge it and take our notes on there. So that would be a little bit different. So for paper, what I would suggest and think about is, for example, also the percentage of recycled content, to reduce the amount of virgin inputs. That could be an interesting metric, as well as the total amount of material used within your company. Can we see that, for example, if we set up some strategies within our company to really think about printing before we use it, so that we as an organization can say like, okay, the total amount of paper use is less, for example, over a year period, as well as the percentage of waste produced, for example. So now we are actually coming to the end of the step-by-step approach, and I do want to give you guys some tips before we wrap it up. Within the supervision phase, we cannot really discuss that currently because that one only occurs when we really have bought our material, we are using it, we are seeing it, and we are evaluating it on the go. It's really important to set up that follow-up, and if needed, to set up a conversation with your supplier to see where adjustments are needed and to capture some of the learnings and see like, okay, what do we want to do different? Not just within the step-by-step approach, but also within the product that we are using. And if everything is going well and everything is going smooth, we should really try to embed that strategy and make sure that we use that in the future again. So this is actually a summary of all the decisions that we made during this webinar, or actually decisions and input that you gave through the webinar, which was important for you within the purchasing process. So where you said like we use paper, for example, for printing and cleaning, not as much for packaging. You really said that some of the risks and some of the important things was like, what kind of waste are we producing? What is the price volatility of that product? And how much CO2 is being produced within that transport? And what we really want to try to achieve with our sustainable strategy within the examining phase was try to maximize the reuse potential. We wanted to reduce the total amount of material used, and we wanted to focus on lifetime extension. Then within the describe phase, we actually saw that we could use certain certificates, but yeah, you guys didn't know if that was in place yet, but it might be something important to think about in the future. And to think about, okay, what specifications are important for me as a company, and how do I write this down, and how will I be asking my supplier to show how that he's doing that. And then we have the evaluation phase with some of the different metrics that we can use. Supervision is empty for now, so there maybe the question would be for you the next time that you buy paper, try to also fill in the supervision phase, discuss that with the purchaser within your company, and ask how they follow up on how paper is being used, how many ways that you are producing, or even maybe if certain certificates are in place, and if not, if it could be a potential to look at. So we are actually coming to the end of this webinar, and we are actually in the Q&A phase. Oh, and I'm not sure if certain questions were being asked in the chat yet. And if not, if you people currently have questions, just ask them now, please. You can raise your hand or just take the mic or put the question in the chat.